The game of our monetary system for the people that are in the know is you borrow money at today's present value to buy assets that are harder than the money that you used to buy them with. So let's just imagine I go and I buy a house for $1 million and I take $1 million loan against that. And then the last 4 years happens. The house is worth $1.4 million. I did absolutely nothing. The price increased 40%. And then I sell it, I make a gain. And the $1 million that I borrowed, it's still technically $1 million, but the true value is something more like $730,000 in present money. And the way that the rich are getting richer is by holding assets, borrowing to buy more assets, and kind of in an endless loop, engaging with this cycle. There's class warfare, all right, but it's my class, the rich class, that's making war, and we're winning. Warren Buffett. Welcome to the What We Learn Project, where we share our most important life lessons so you don't have to go through them yourself, and our struggles to overcome our challenges in a crazy world. We'll be taking you with us on our journey of growth, expansion, sometimes failure, and sometimes success, all with the intention that you learn and grow with us along the way. In today's episode, you're going to learn how I became a millionaire in under a year, the principles I used to accomplish that goal, and how my entire concept of money had to change in order for that to be possible. You're going to have an entirely new understanding of what money is, how it works, and how to increase your wealth when this is all over. I hope it blows your mind like the journey blew mine. I'm one of your hosts, Micah Cranman, and I've been an entrepreneur for the last 2.5 decades. In early 2023, I sold my business after nearly 20 years, and I'm interested in what it means to live a conscious, joyful, awakened, and abundant life. And this podcast is my effort to share that exploration with the world. You can find me on Instagram at Tatonkuh, Tatonkuh, if you'd like to learn more and follow me. And I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Alan Bittaker. Alan is by training a doctor of chiropractic and is currently practicing as a transformational coach with a background in a variety of modalities to support his clients, including network spinal, energetics, parts work, inner child work, somatics, and men's work. If what we talk about helps you uncover an area where you'd like to grow, he's available for one-on-one support or through one of his group containers. To learn more, visit him at drallen.co. Let's dive in. Today, we're going to talk about money. And we're going to talk about my personal journey to becoming a millionaire, which was, to be honest, much longer than a year. The title is a little bit clickbaity. I had to hook you somehow. So there's a little bit of honesty coming through. It's good to be here with you in Costa Rica, Alan. And I think we're going to do this one in a little bit of an interview style. So, yeah. Alan, I'll let you kind of lead the questions, and I'll answer to the best of my ability.
Okay, awesome. Spiritual people do like the.
I do. I'm one of them.
I wanted us to do that.
Okay.
I didn't want to be super spiritual though, so.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
No, just feels good for me to slow the pace. Pure Vida, man. We're in Costa Rica.
That's fair. That's very fair. I'm just trying to get those intros out so people get hooked. Yeah,
hook them.
We gotta hook them.
Well, something that I'll just start by saying, I really admire you. And your business acumen. Mike and I spent 2 months in Bali this past year, end of last year, beginning of 2024. And you offered me a lot of support financially, in not directly financially, which you did offer me some direct financial support.
Sure did.
But, but like, through insights and ways of thinking. And I really appreciated that. So I'm excited for you to offer some of that gold here on a recorded conversation.
Yeah, Cool.
Yeah, before I ask you any specific questions, I feel like you've got some just like things that kind of drop knowledge.
Yeah.
Are you open to just
riffing? Yeah, for sure.
And then I think once you riff, I'll have specific questions because I've been an entrepreneur for 5 years, and so not 20 years yet. And
26 actually.
26. It's freaking awesome being an entrepreneur, isn't it? It's like so special. But yeah, drop some jewels for us.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the conversation around money it's multi-layered. And I think a good place to start is in relation, like, what is your relationship to money? And I think a lot of people, particularly in quote unquote conscious communities, have a sort of background, or hidden, antipathy with money. Like there's a resistance to resource and money. And I think because of that, right, I think that's a consequence of an association that people make to human beings who have gotten lost in the game of money because they lack a prior value system to inform their relationship to money and how that should actually look. So I think before we dive into the conversation of how to generate wealth, which is really what this is about, abundance in whatever form matters to you, it's important to define what this is all for. Because if the game of money for you is, an ego game, meaning you want nice things, you want to look good, you want a big yacht, fine, but recognize that that's an ego game and it's never going to end. There's always more. There's always someone who's doing better. So if it's about that side of things, then it'll be a particularly unsatisfying and unfulfilling experience. And for a spiritual person, that's one of the reasons why there can be resistance. But if you've defined, okay, this is why I'm interested in having abundance, then the exploration can be a lot more delightful. So the questions, I just have some questions for you. I don't really have answers because the answers are different for everyone. But my questions for you are, what is money for you? Why is it for that? What are you willing to do to have it? What aren't you willing to do to have it? And if you can start to answer those questions, then it's just, you'll be able to pursue it with a lot more ease and alignment. Like for me, money isn't for nice things. I mean, yes, I use it for that, but actually money is for freedom of choice. So when I sold my business, instead of buying a $10,000 Rolex, I bought a $50 Timex, or Casio rather. And it's fake gold. It's not real gold. It's fake gold.
It's fake, everybody. It looks cool.
It looks cool though,
but it's not cool.
I disagree.
It actually is cool.
I disagree. So it's those kinds of distinctions where, money for me is about having a bank of resource that I can rely on for the choices that I want to make in life so that I can be free to do the things that really matter to me, and for me to be well resourced to take care of my future family, which I don't have now, but want to, and to be able to, be a system of support for the people that I care about in my life right now. It's not about a nice car or, there's some niceties that I like. I like being able to, spend a little extra money on a nice t-shirt, or, if I want to buy a nice car, I can, but those are not the fundamental reasons. And I've had, since I sold my business, a number of opportunities to make money in different ways. And ultimately I decided not to, because it wasn't in the box of things that I was willing to do. When I sold my business, I made a conscious decision. I'm not going to do more things that aren't fulfilling for me in order to get money. Now I'm in a very fortunate position to be able to do that. But that's one of the benefits that you gain. So really think about this, so that you can have a sense of like, this is why I'm doing this. And it can feel like it's deeply in alignment for you to have a lot of resource. This is a deep rabbit hole, but
I want to say something here, because I found for me, and I'm not in a position of, I've just sold a company and I have loads of resource, but just in the act of generating business, me getting clear around not doing the things that I don't want to do. Like I know that can come off as like, oh, that's going to create challenge for me. But what I've realized is that when I don't do the things that I don't want to do, and I really stick to the things that I want to do, my excitement is so much higher, and the magnetism in me and generating is a lot more clear. Because if I'm like doing things, and a lot of times I think it's like doing things for the wrong reasons, even if I want to do them, then there's this internal resistance that like blocks me from actually making the magic.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good segue into the sort of key principles that are relevant for how to make money, how to create wealth. But before we do that,
I've got a question for you before we go there.
Okay, cool.
Well, you referred me once to a podcast, and I believe the name of the podcast was "What is Money?"
Yes.
Yeah. So like we went the step further of like, what is money for? But I'm curious if you could break down for the listeners, what is money actually?
Yeah.
And maybe you could also refer them to that podcast, because it's pretty extensive.
Oh my God,
it's pretty extensive.
It's incredible.
And I maybe got through the first couple episodes.
Yeah.
And I was pretty mind blown around the mental shifts around what is wealth, what is money.
Sure.
Like, what is it money for on like a, I guess from a transactional piece?
Yeah. So I think this is a really key understanding, and it's something that I think we'll dive into in a little bit more detail a little bit later in the podcast, because this is such a key element. But I'll try and give a high level summary. If you think about what money is, humans have been engaging in activity that is in service of their survival, and in some cases thriving, for a very long time. First hunter-gatherers, then you had farming and rearing animals, and at some stage, and then once those came along, then you started to have people who weren't engaged in that activity and were craftspeople. And at some stage, there became a need to be able to take the value that was created from those activities and exchange it for one thing for another. Because let's say you've raised cattle. Not everyone wants cattle. Maybe they want, apples, and you don't have apples. There's an intermediary, which is money, which says, okay, we're storing the value that was created, and that value we now call money can be exchanged for goods and services at an agreed upon price between two people. When you think about it in that way, money is literally just a technology.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is. And like every technology, there are different forms of it, and the forms of money have changed over time, from seashells in some cultures where the seashells were rare and hard to get, to eventually gold. And there are some newer technologies for money that are even better. But the key understanding is that money is utterly neutral, and our social fabric is built around the current set of technologies that we have for transmitting value over time.
Mm-hmm.
So the accumulation of wealth, which in itself isn't the goal, that's in service of whatever the purpose is that you've decided on, is really, when you boil it down, it's actually about two things. one, creating, well, more than two things, but creating value. Then, if you really want to accelerate the process, taking yourself out as the rate limiting factor on the creation of value. And then finally, once you have some accumulated resource, some accumulation of money, understanding how money works in a deep way so that you can make investments that increase the amount of wealth that you have or increase the amount of income that you have from that wealth over time. The simplest way to say it is first figure out how to make money babies, then figure out how to have other people raise those babies for you, and then so that you can have more of them. And then finally have your babies make babies. So it's still really
Just propagate. It's just life.
it's just life. It really kind of is.
Yeah.
And so I think it's worth talking about each of those three things in sequence.
Okay.
But I'm curious if you've got any kind of input or questions so far.
No, I think any input or questions I have might be distracting.
Okay, cool.
I'll mention the one thing because I just think it's really interesting is like from that podcast, something I remember that I found very interesting was he was talking about how maybe it was the gold rush, but he was talking about how value was he was comparing value with the capacity to generate exchange. And I think he was moving towards the idea of cryptocurrency and why crypto is valuable.
Specifically Bitcoin. Yeah.
Okay. You can talk about that later.
It's not
But basically the transactional value of like the value of transaction itself is what he was describing as like what is money. And I found that really interesting. He was talking about basically taking money. He was talking about the railroad system, I believe, and how that was a value transactor. And that was something that made a family extremely wealthy because they had the, I guess no other family or business could transact like they could because they could bring things from one place to another, and they could actually bring cash and they could bring value in exchange.
Yeah.
And that transaction of exchange is so valuable within itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are we diverging a little bit?
No, I think you're exactly on the money. I think that's a really good segue into what we want to talk about. So let's talk about the first step in building wealth. And maybe what I'll do is I'll correlate this with my own personal story of entrepreneurship and my business in particular.
Yeah.
Because we did say how I became a millionaire in less than a year was the title of this. So maybe
it's bullshit.
It is.
Don't believe him.
It is and it isn't. It is and it isn't. And
it was probably less than a minute that you became a millionaire, actually.
Well, it was a moment in time.
It was a moment in time.
Yeah.
You should have made that.
Yeah. In a millisecond. So the first thing to understand is it's about value creation. We don't really talk about this, but intuitively, we all understand that we get money for creating some kind of value. Most people get money through exchanging their effort, their labor, for payment in some kind. So in your case, you're a transformational coach. You're working with a client in a specific way over a set period of time. They're paying you a certain amount, right?
Yeah.
And the value that you're offering them is transformation, right? Of their personal experience of life. So for me, the business that I started was an e-commerce brand. It was in the car audio space. I started it with two partners, and the value that we were offering was a solution to a common problem, which is that the sound systems in BMW vehicles sucked. And so we came up with a solution to improve the overall sound quality in BMWs and began to sell kits online. So the value there is I'm solving a pain point or a problem for an individual who's having an experience they don't want to be having. They want to enjoy their music in their car at a higher level, and we got you, dog. That was our thing.
Is that the commercial?
It should have been.
You're in pain.
You're in pain. You're suffering.
Music sucks. You want it to sound better.
You want it to sound better. Yeah, exactly. So if I were to give somebody entrepreneurial advice, what I would say is that we live in a world where it would be easy to think that it's all handled, right? Like there's something for everything, but particularly with the advent of the internet, there are all these incredible niches, and there are so many different ways to create value. Wherever someone is making money, they're almost certainly creating some kind of value. Even the things that we don't like or find distasteful, let's say the consumption of fossil fuels for those that have, concerns about global warming, which is most everyone. The value is that the manufacturers, extractors of fossil fuels are providing a source of energy that people then get to use to move goods and services around. Mm-hmm. Power, electricity, blah, blah, blah. So there's value that's being created there. So the invitation is to not just look at, it's like, where in the market is there something that is, where in the market is there a need that's not being met? Where is your sort of zone of excellence, or where do you really shine where you could meet that? And then, like, what unique resources do you have to facilitate that? This is a huge conversation. I mean, this is basically the conversation of entrepreneurship. There's so many books and resources around that. And so what I really want to do is I want to give a high level summary so people can understand, okay, first master this. And once you've mastered this game, you can start to create a flow of resource to yourself, a flow of money to yourself that is sufficient to meet your needs. And then the next stage is moving into taking yourself out of the role of value creator as doing the labor and becoming the value creator as the individual who is, what's the right way to say it? Becoming the value creator as the individual who is orchestrating that process and letting others be the ones that are utilizing their labor or their unique set of resources.
A good map here is the cash flow quadrant.
Yeah, that's if you're not familiar, that's Robert Kiyosaki's concept, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I remember reading about it many years ago. I was fortunate enough to have my dad kind of expose me to those resources when I was young, and it imprinted something on me so that, later in life, it actually mattered a lot. But
I've been returning to it just as a reminder, because in the transformational coach world, I think that there's like this blind glorification of being a coach and thinking that there are some ways of building wealth as a coach, but it's also seems challenging to jump from self-employed to business owner, where self-employed is what I generally am operating as, into a business owner where I'm the orchestrator.
Yeah.
And I'm removed from the service itself.
Yeah, it is a big conversation. And for me, in my own business, in the beginning, we were super scrappy. I wasn't making a lot of money. We were taking off the shelf audio components and adapting them to work. And over time, we got better and better. We sourced a manufacturer who could make them for us, so we no longer had the labor of doing that process. We then hired employees to run sales, to run support, third-party service providers to run the marketing, all of which was initially in-house. And so over time, less and less and less of the day-to-day operations became my role and responsibility, and more of the strategic decision-making became my responsibility. And the reason this is so critical is it doesn't matter how uh, how like potent of an amount of output that you have, there's an upper bound on how much you as an individual can do.
So,
And if the exchange is, I mean, ultimately, it's always true that you're exchanging your time and energy for resource. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the quality and type of time and resource changes, and you're kind of escalating up the scale of value that you can generate for yourself as a consequence because of a concept called leverage, which is both that can refer to debt, borrowing from other people, or investment. And it can also refer to having others do work for you. So the two pieces are create value and then figure out how to remove yourself from being the main driver of the business or the way in which you're creating value. And there's a near infinite number of ways to create value. And there are so many resources out there. So I'm not going to belabor those points because I don't think they're actually that new for people.
I am curious about something.
Yeah.
It's like if someone's looking at how they want to create value in the world, the options are in some ways dependent on what you're like. The business that I'm in, it's a bit challenging for me to outsource myself. Right.
Yeah.
So there is a level of discernment if someone's wanting to like go on the path of generating wealth, versus like it might be different than like my mission and my service to the world.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different ways to think about this. Let's use, being a transformational coach as an example.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of move up the you can move up the scale of creating value by literally being more valuable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also really important to note that value is a subjective thing. It's not based in reality. The value of a Rolex versus a Casio, you're not getting,
just make that up.
Yeah.
I'm making it up.
You're not getting 200 times more utility out of a Rolex.
Yeah.
In fact, you might be getting less. But it has 200 times the price. So there's this perception that's involved. So if you are in the game of exchanging time and energy for money, your services for time and money, then it behooves you to figure out what's the way that I can generate the most value for myself and those that I'm serving at the same time, so that I'm maximizing the amount of resource that's coming in. And then the next jump, and this is the reason removing yourself is so important, is not only do you get the gain of not having to be effectively a slave to what you've created and a slave to the job that you've created for yourself. I mean, when I started my business, I had to show up very consistently with a tremendous amount of focus and effort for a very long time. And when I began to remove myself, I started to have a level of freedom that was incredible, where I could take months off at a time. And that has an incredible amount of value, but for you as an individual. But the other thing that it does is once you've removed yourself, you've now got an asset that has an ability to be sold.
Yeah.
And for you to get a big chunk of money, which is how you can start to play a completely different game. And the reason for that is people want to buy valuable income producing assets. And that's how your money babies make more money babies, is you buy assets that make that increase in value or generate income. So there's a hidden value that people may not understand. And the questions that I would ask are like, what is really, where is the value that's really being created here? Is it what I'm doing? Is it the knowledge that I'm offering? Is it the systems and structures? Is it the process that I'm taking people through?
It's a really good question.
Combination. A combination of all of the above. Do I need to be the one that does this? Does it need to be one-on-one? Like, so in the quote unquote, from a wealth creation standpoint, not a personal standpoint, but from a wealth creation standpoint, the optimal situation is one in which you have a single point of contact who can oversee the whole structure of the business and execute on your vision, where you have almost no need to engage day to day because you've optimized every single aspect of the business. Again, there's so much information out there on this. So I just want to encourage people, like, this is a skill that you've got to develop. And this was something that took me a long time to do. I had my business for 19 years before I sold it. And so there's no escaping it. If you want wealth, you have to have created some value, or you have to be related to somebody who, or you have to be very loved by someone who wants to give you the value that they've created, they've generated. Do you feel like that's complete before we move to a conversation around like money, how it works, and investment?
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the transition from value creation into investment, and I'll tell you a little bit about my own story. So after creating the value that I did with this business, which was essentially I had this car audio business. I'd had it for 19 years. It had a long history. It was very profitable. And so a third-party investor wanted to buy it. And they did. They ultimately did. And that left me with a chunk of money. And when I received the chunk of change, which for the record was not enough to make me a millionaire.
You were not yet a millionaire.
I was not yet a millionaire.
Okay.
I was hundreds of thousands of dollars in air. And I intuitively understood this, and this was in like February of 2023. So if you recall, at that time, and even still, even as we record this, inflation was really high. It was all over the news. Everyone was talking about it. Anyone who was paying attention noticed that home prices had gone up by almost half. Cost of food, everything had gone up in value.
Yeah.
Or sorry, in price.
Huh.
And so the concern that I had was, holy shit, I got this chunk of money, and if things keep up this way, it's not going to be worth anything really soon. What do I do? And so I wanted to understand. It's like I felt like I needed to understand reality in a new way.
Yeah, because even the line of thinking that you're coming from right now there's like some level of assumption that some people might not know what you mean by your chunk of money might not be valuable anymore.
Okay, yeah. So let's back up. Let's talk about the monetary system, and let's talk about inflation.
Yeah.
Because this is a really interesting thing, and this is something that I didn't understand before I sold the business. If you're from the United States, you'll see things in the news like inflation's at 2% or inflation's at 9%. You'll hear things about the quote unquote, the Fed and interest rates and markets going up and down.
I have no clue at all what any of that means.
Okay, great. So that means that there's an opportunity to share some things with people that are going to be really valuable. So let's just start with inflation. And people are used to the experience of prices going up over time. And we think about it and experience it as more or less a fact of life.
Yeah.
Does that sound true to you?
Yeah.
So it's not, actually. And I'll demonstrate that it's not through a little thought experiment. I want you to imagine a game of Monopoly in which there are 4 players and everyone's given the same amount of money at the start, which is typical of a game of Monopoly. And instead of, and when you play Monopoly, the prices stay the same for everything, except for rents go up as people build little structures. If you've never played Monopoly, I'm sorry, this analogy is going to fail for you, but most people have, so I think this will work.
Yeah.
And specifically, the price of the properties remains the same. But I want you to imagine a game of Monopoly in which there are always more properties being added to the board. What would have to happen to the prices of all properties in order for that to work?
So there's, I feel like the right answer is that it would go up.
No, that's
It would actually go down.
it would go down.
Wow.
Because you have the same amount of money and the number of properties is increasing. So the amount that anyone can pay for a given property
It's less.
is less relative to the other properties. And so if an individual did nothing, then their same amount of money would actually buy them more property. So the question to ask, and what that represents in a very simplistic way, is what's called a productive economy. If you look around, there are constantly more goods and services that are being added every day. And we're getting better and better at delivering those goods and services for a given price, or at any given moment. So, we get better at manufacturing things. There's more land, there's more homes.
I think the cell phone is a good example of this.
Yeah.
Like how accessible the cell phone is now.
So
where most people have an iPhone, right?
Most people have a very fancy smartphone.
Regardless of where they are at in the world.
And you would think that if the amount of money was the same in the world, then the price, because we've gotten better and better and better at making them
more available,
the price would go down.
Yeah.
In some cases, it actually has, but in a lot of cases, it hasn't. Like the iPhone, the price has gone up a lot. I remember I bought the first iPhone for $250, my first one.
Really?
$200. It initially came out for, maybe it came out for $800 and then they reduced the price to $400.
Yeah.
That sounds something like that.
$600 or something.
Now my most recent iPhone was $1,300. And I think technology is a little bit of a bad example, but homes are an easier one to get. The price has gone up a lot for homes in the United States in the last 4 years. And it's not because the homes are better. In fact, the same home with more wear and tear on it than it had 4 years ago,
significantly worse,
is
now costs more.
So the question is, why the fuck is this happening? Because we live in structures where there are a small number of individuals who control the money supply. What I mean by that is money that we use to exchange for goods and services, we think has some inherent value. It does not. It's just an agreement between individuals that, hey, this dollar is worth something. And if there's a large number of individuals that agree that it's worth something, i.e. there's demand for it, then it has a value. Now, this will be incredibly revealing. Since the start of COVID, the money supply in the United States, meaning how much money is in existence, this is the best estimates that we have, increased by 40%.
40. I thought it was 30. Okay.
40%, roughly. I could be getting the math slightly off, but roughly 40%. Do you want to take a guess at what the increase in price of homes is over that same period?
At least 40%.
40 fucking percent on average. So what's happening is we're living in a world in which you have a small number of individuals who are creating money out of thin air. And then that money is being distributed in an uneven way. So if we go back to our monopoly analogy, you have more goods and services coming into the market. And then if all the players are getting a lot more money, then the price goes up. In fact, what it's typically like is the players who already have the most stuff are getting money at an outsized rate relative to the other players, driving up the prices.
Oh, that's terrible. It's terrible to think about.
And impoverishing the rest of the players on the board. So here's the thing that I really like. The most important thing that I want people to get from this podcast is that if you want to create wealth, you can get incredibly good at creating value. But if you don't understand the system through which that value is transmitted between human beings, then you're likely to run out of the value that you've generated. And at some point, that skill of creating value will go away.
Yeah.
So this gets us into the world of investment. If we live in an environment where our governments are printing money like fucking crazy, and there's a whole world of understanding. Again, I think that the podcast, What is Money, is incredibly valuable for people. It's a podcast about Bitcoin and why it's distinct and different. I don't necessarily want this to be a conversation about crypto. But it will help people to understand the dynamics that underlie the monetary system. And the reason this is important is, let's just imagine that I make $1 million and then I store it as cash, just dollars. We all know that based on everyone's experience, that the value of that money in 10 years will be significantly less than it is today.
For just clarification, if you were to do that and then the last 3 years were to happen, essentially your $1 million would go down in value by 40%.
Yeah, it's what I could get for it is reduced by the amount the money supply is increased, approximately.
Yeah.
It's math. It's literally simple fucking math. And people think the prices have gone up. The prices have stayed the same for most things. It's just that the value of our currency has gone down. So the problem with money printing is that it has two really unfortunate effects. For the people who already own or hold hard assets or value generating assets, like real estate, like stocks, like companies that are generating income, which I guess a stock is, and commodities. When money gets printed, the price of those things changes in relationship to the amount of money that's printed. And their wealth goes up relative to the debt that they've almost always used to acquire those assets. Okay. Say this is kind of getting into the next section, which is leverage. The game of our monetary system, for the people that are in the know, is you borrow money at today's present value to buy assets that are harder than the money that you used to buy them with. So let's just imagine I go and I buy a house for $1 million and I take $1 million loan against that.
Yeah.
And then the last 4 years happens.
Yeah.
the house is worth $1.4 million. I did absolutely nothing because the price increased 40%.
And then you sell it.
And then I sell it, I make a gain. And the $1 million that I borrowed, it's still technically $1 million, but the true value is something more like $730,000 in present money. So the way that the rich are getting richer is by holding assets, borrowing to buy more assets, and kind of in an endless loop, engaging with this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So the game of wealth creation is to understand that, okay, in an environment where our governments are creating lots of new money and the reason they're doing that is because they're paying for all sorts of social programs for people who can't afford normal living because they printed a bunch of money in the past and made them effectively poorer. Yeah. So it's a vicious cycle.
And they're dumping money into wars, which is a whole other conversation, right?
Or, I mean, they're paying for things that people have not agreed to with their taxes. Yeah. And so they're paying. The really sad part is inflationary monetary policy, that is printing new money, impoverishes those who can least afford it. The wealthy get richer as a consequence. Mm-hmm. So if you think that left-leaning politics are right or right-leaning politics are right, they're both fucking you over. It's the same game. It's just a slightly different strategy on both sides. It's my experience with this has been, I used to be very left-leaning, and I cannot consider myself someone who likes or believes in either political party. I think that's true for most people of our generation.
Sorry.
But I digress. What I want to get people to really understand is that once you've created value and you've accumulated some degree of assets, then you want to place those assets somewhere where you can expect an ongoing either income or for those assets to increase drastically in value. And this is how I became a millionaire. I looked at, what am I going to do with my money? I have, several $100,000 to deploy, and I don't want to leave it in cash because I know it'll be worth less than if I put it somewhere. What are my options? And I looked at real estate. It didn't seem like a good idea for a variety of reasons. It was going to take too much of my capital stack. I wasn't going to get a very good return based on my own particular needs. I looked at starting another business, and that didn't work for me because I didn't want to jump right back into the game that I had just left. Yeah. And so I ultimately landed on Bitcoin. And the reason is that Bitcoin is a different kind of currency. So it is a currency with a fixed supply, meaning there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. And that's not controlled by any group of individuals. It's controlled by computer code. So if you think about it logically, money as a store of value over time, what I did is I said, okay, my value is held in a system where I know it will get reduced over time because I have, let's say, 300,000 units. And if the total number of units are getting increased by 10 to 15% per year, then my relative value will be shrinking.
Yep.
If I instead take that and I buy a portion of a system in which there will only ever be 21 million, in other words, a harder form of money. When I say harder, I mean, it's very difficult to produce more.
Yeah.
There is a way that is happening. You might have heard of mining in Bitcoin. But there's a tremendous amount of resource that has to go into that. Whereas our Federal Reserve can literally just make new money at the, snap of a finger.
Right.
So I just said, okay, I need to have it in a storage system that's better. And anyone who's followed Bitcoin at all knows that it's incredibly volatile. And I made the decision to do it when I did because it looked to be at the bottom of the wild swings that it's on. And since that decision, it's increased by almost 3x versus the price that I bought in at.
Yeah.
And the reason I assert that has happened is that as more and more people begin to awaken to the corruption of our monetary system, and begin to understand, oh my God, I can't actually store value over time here. It gets eroded. Then there's going to be a flight from what are called fiat currencies. Fiat literally means by decree. So it's money by decree, which includes the euro, the yen, the renminbi, the dollar.
What does by decree mean?
Meaning
By any standard?
by decree, meaning they can make new money by decree. So the underlying value of fiat currency is nothing. They can just make more whenever they want. So as people begin to understand this, I assert that more and more value will be stored in
Totally.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so that was why I made the decision to do that. And it was a good one. I wouldn't consider myself a genius, but it this kind of goes back to our original value conversation where, you could argue that I created value by moving from a system that was, a bad storage system for money and converting it to a system that has a positive network effect for everyone that participates in it. The more people that are using the Bitcoin system of storing value, the greater the wealth effect for everyone. So it's a sort of positive feedback loop.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more, because I think we've covered the monetary system question.
Yeah.
What people I think need to understand is, in a system where the value that you're creating is getting eroded at whatever rate your government is printing new money per year, then you have two responsibilities if you want to create wealth. The first is to increase the value of your holdings by a rate that is greater than the rate of inflation. And the second is to figure out what investments are right for your particular set of needs, your what for, in a way that works for you. So, and to not spend the money on that which will not create more value for you in the future. So I know that's a little bit heady, so I'll bring it into the real world. I could have, if I wanted, when I sold the business, taken the cash that I had, and I could have bought, I'm still a car guy. I have a boner a mile long for the new electric Porsches.
Oh,
they're just so sexy.
wow.
I love them.
Okay.
I want one. I could have spent $130,000 on that. I could have bought a $10,000 Rolex. I could have gone to Vegas and gambled $50,000 away. I could have had a big party with all my friends. And
You did.
I did, but that was relatively small.
Yeah.
It was a very small percentage.
Yeah.
But instead, I basically didn't change my spending habits at all. like I'm a little bit more free with what I buy, particularly around food and like taking care of myself, massages, like, you know, a couple of nice shirts. But I'm still driving the same 17-year-old car. I'm still like, nothing changed.
Yeah.
And that was because I was clear for myself that the highest value that I have for this money is future family and freedom, not stuff. So I made a choice to deploy it in a way that would be maximally, to my understanding, in service of that. And that I believed would increase the total amount of wealth much more rapidly than I would be spending it, which was correct, at least so far.
Yeah.
You can do this in so many different ways. The game of investing is starting to understand that all you're doing is you're taking money that's in a low resource state, i.e. it's not doing anything, and placing it into a high resource situation where it can generate more value in the world. So you make an investment in a new business idea or an existing business that needs capital to expand. You buy a portion of a publicly traded company in the form of a stock, which yields dividends because you're getting paid a portion of the profits of that business. It has a long track record. And so the concept is basically you're just now using the skill of understanding how value is created in the world because you've gotten good at it for yourself. And that's how you've accumulated some resource to be able to invest. And then you're looking for opportunity out there in the world that could generate an increase in your wealth or an increase in your income, which effectively can turn back into an increase in your wealth. Using those skills of understanding how value is created. And it's really not that deep. It all hinges on understanding how value is created and understanding the water that we're swimming in terms of the monetary system. And there are ways that you can sort of hyper accelerate this through credit. So this is the game, I think, that the wealthy play that most people don't. We think of debt as bad. Most people think of debt as bad.
Yep.
But I'll give you a case in point. I had about $75,000 of debt as a personal line of credit that I took out to take care of some much needed health expenses while I still owned my business. When I sold my business, I didn't pay that debt off. Instead, I put that money into Bitcoin because I believed that it would increase in value much more than the interest rate that I was paying. And I was right.
Yeah.
So it's riskier, but borrowing money to take from one place, you know, from a lender or whatever, and placing it in another environment where it can do a lot better is an incredible way to create wealth. And it's one of the reasons why
business loan.
It's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's all the same. Low resource state, high resource state, and you figure out how to create value in that exchange. And it's one of the reasons why a really good credit rating actually, I think, is insanely valuable, because what people or institutions with money want is they want to lend, they want to generate yield on their resources with individuals or institutions who have a proven track record of giving them back more money than they borrowed. That's the whole game that's being played. Wow. So wealth is fundamentally understanding how money works and getting skillful at taking some money and making more money with it through value creation. Over and over and over and over and over. That's it.
I'm curious about your eye for seeing that. You know how sometimes when we learn how to see something, we can't unsee it.
Yeah.
The more we see it, the more we see it.
Yeah.
What's your transformation been like in your ability to see opportunities that are going to generate value in the world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's a skill that I'm still developing. I have a sort of relatively narrow lens. My path was through a very small business. Yeah. And so I think I'm most skillful at looking at a small business and instantly being able to be like, this shit's going down, or this is going to do great. Yeah. Like that. Yeah. I'm not perfect with that, but I can walk into a store and be like, this shit is not going to be here in 6 months. I think a lot of people can.
I feel like I'm getting better at that. Yeah.
I can also generally sniff out, a lot of this has to do with leadership. I mean, businesses aren't real things. They're just a name that we place on a group of human beings that are working together toward a shared vision that ultimately is in service of whatever whatever value is being created and the money that it generates as a consequence of that value. But I think it's simple, but not necessarily easy. So I have a much harder time being able to, I have no fucking clue, what company with AI technology is going to outperform the next one. I'm too dumb for that. I don't know. But I think it's sort of stay in the lane that you know, or stay in the lane that you can kind of wrap your mind around.
Right.
And some things are really obvious. Some things aren't.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question. It's kind of just a long ramble.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
I think where I'm most skillful is being able to appreciate whether or not there's something unique being offered in a given business context, whether it's a service or a product.
Yeah.
And being able to sense whether or not an individual that I'm going to work with is going to actually be able to deliver on what they say they're committed to.
Mm.
And it's been my experience operating in the business world. Most people are fucking useless. I know that sounds cynical, but in terms of actually doing the thing they say they're going to do, so few people actually deliver. And there's a level of discernment that when I came in wide-eyed and bushy-tailed in my early 20s, it was I just thought everyone could do the job. And most people actually don't or can't. And so having a willingness to cut through the noise, cut through my personal, whether or not I like someone, and really kind of boil it down to the essence of can this person really do the best job? Mm-hmm. I think that's maybe the highest skill that I've gotten, just because I've dealt with people so much in a business context.
Yeah.
If you want, I can speak to the characteristics that I notice.
That the characteristics to discern for when someone's pitching you on something and you're like, that's bullshit.
Yeah. The main one is this person deeply engaged with and excited by the thing that they're offering?
Mm-hmm.
And do they have high integrity?
Mm.
Do I have the experience that they're going to really follow through?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the last one is, do they fully understand what I'm asking for?
That's a big one.
That's a big one.
That's the one that I notice. I feel like people intuitively sense this, and it's the for me the feeling of being, it's like trust, right? Like, did you repeat back what I said so that I know that you heard what I said and that you understand it, and now we're both clear on what I'm needing.
Yeah.
And if you're good at doing that, I now trust you more.
Mm-hmm.
And at least I know that you know what I need.
You know that I know that you know that I know.
We both know at this point. And so I trust you more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other one, the excitement piece, is really interesting because it's like, I'm a bit of a junkie in terms of excitement. Like, I fucking love excitement. And I find some of the best people at business are in the business of enrollment through the tool of excitement. And so that's something that I'm like, but I'm like, I know that like the delivery of my gifts is through my excitement, you know, and that's got to be there in order for it to happen. But it's like the integrity piece, I think, is like a really big one to discern upon. How do you see integrity? How do you suss that one out?
I'm going to answer that. Before I do, I just want to say one more thing around excitement. In the world of business, it's been my experience that things are usually much harder, or take a lot more time, energy, and resource. And you have to wade through a lot of really unpleasant bullshit to get a lot of things done. And so the excitement piece is valuable in that someone needs to have enough of a charge about doing something.
Yeah.
Or enough resource and enough resources, if they're not the one that's going to be doing it, to be able to get it done. So yeah, I just wanted to name that.
It's kind of like energy, access to energy to make it go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Whether it's the person's sweat equity, or they have access to funds.
Yeah, exactly.
To make something happen. Yeah. Or they have access to a team, or they have access to people.
Yeah. Integrity is a little bit, it can be a little bit trickier. I think one way that I like to do it is already having had a personal relationship with that individual, so that I can see and understand how they are with others. Although I do think people behave differently in different contexts. Like the people that know me as a friend, who, like, I've hired a couple of friends, you know, from a prior business. And before I did, I had to have a conversation where I was like, hey, our relationship's going to change because you're going to get a different dude who is in a context of running a business, and the business comes before the relationship in that context. And I may do things because I have a responsibility to the mission of the business that I wouldn't do as your friend, you know, AKA fire you. Like, I might fire you, or I might not give you a pay raise, or I might, you know, like,
yeah,
those kinds of things. But I think integrity is one of those things where having a great network is kind of, I think it's incredibly essential.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, then you're sort of having a test. So just being really thorough, like slow to hire, get as much evidence as you can, and be very willing to fire quickly. I haven't had to do that a lot, but when you know, you should.
I've heard of an equation that I think, like, I buy into the equation. The equation is financial capital, or financial, what's the word? Yeah, it's like financial capital is equal to relational capital plus creative capital.
Yeah. Yeah, they one begets the other.
Yeah. It's like relational capital, obviously the people you know who's willing to invest in you, maybe collaborate with you to make things go. It's like more energy in the bucket. And then the creative capital is like, what's the creative idea that we're bringing to the table to make, to add value to the world?
Yeah. It's all, value creation of one form or another. And you can create value relationally, creatively. I mean, it's near infinite. There's so much resource to be had. And when you have financial capital, you can just accelerate it. And it's sort of the rocket fuel for the whole thing. I mean, I made more than double the amount of like net resource from a single play to move into Bitcoin from dollars than I did from the sale of my entire business. Like one move took me 20 years of effort.
Yeah.
And the other took me one decision.
And but it took a year.
Yeah, it took a year and waiting.
Still more. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's insane.
That's insane.
So these things are really nonlinear. And once you have capital, fucking protect that shit. Like, it's not my place to tell you how you should or shouldn't spend resources, but be really, really, really thoughtful about how you spend the hard-earned value that gets created. And just, if you're diligent about applying it in a place where it can make more of itself.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
It's an edgy question.
Yeah.
At what point do you think that, I don't know what word to use here, but like, is it right to continue to leave money in a place like Bitcoin where it's generating more money, but maybe not so much directly generating value in the world? So here's, if someone has $1 billion and they're putting that billion into Bitcoin because they want to make more billions, but in some ways they're kind of hoarding their resources.
Yeah.
Right. And they're hoarding it from the market, from actually making other things happen. So at what point, at what level of income in your lens do you see as like, when do you pull money out and start doing things with it versus like making more money just for the sake of making more money?
I mean, this goes back to our earlier question.
Yeah.
I think this is sort of the essence of the whole thing. Like, what for? For me, just for the sake of transparency, my net worth is right now around $1 million. And plus or minus, because most of it's in Bitcoin, which is highly volatile.
Yeah.
To me, that's not the level of resource that I want to bring into my future family.
Totally.
I want to have enough for us to be able to have a beautiful home, the support that we need for my kids to get an amazing education, for my future wife not to have to work during child rearing phases, if that's what we decide, possibly even the same for me.
Totally.
There's a certain amount of resource for the vision that I have for my own experience of life. That's distinct for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think this is it's a deeper conversation. I think it would be easy to pathologize someone like Jeff Bezos. Like, when is enough, bro? Like, you really need another super yacht, guy? But we're not having that experience of that particular individual. And whatever the set of needs are that at least he's attempting to get met by accumulating more and more wealth. And I think it's really important for you to define for yourself these things. In part because, man, I think one of the great sicknesses of our society is that we have people that are violating their morality, their moral code, their internal sense of what's right and wrong in order to accumulate more resources.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do so, they feel shittier about themselves and emptier. And as a consequence, they have a sense of lack or absence, which they then attempt to fill by generating more and probably violating their own moral code again. Yeah. And it's a downward spiral. And soon enough, you're Donald Trump shitting in a gold toilet, and that's your fate, right? And I think any clear-minded person, whatever your political ideology, probably wouldn't want to be Donald Trump and having the experience that guy is having. No. It's not a good look.
I don't want that.
I don't think he's having a positive experience. Although he may be a bad example because I'm not sure there is a moral code there.
He seems like he thinks he's having a great experience.
Yeah, well, maybe so.
The best.
The best.
The best.
The best. You want great experience? I've got great experience. The best. Some people say that I'm the most experienced, the greatest experience having individual on the planet.
Having an individual.
Anyway, we've gone to Donald Trump. I think just you got to figure it out for yourself. Yeah. And I don't think anyone can answer this in an absolutist, morally right or wrong way. It seems obvious to me that once you've crossed into the B's,
it's an interesting
you have enough.
It's a really interesting thing. I mean, there's ways of generating numbers and equations for say for instance, if I have this much in the bank or in Bitcoin and it's generating this much passively, that much feeds my life for me to do whatever I want, right? And sometimes that number in the bank is a huge ass number, right? It could be if my lifestyle is 100K or 500K or $1 million per year, and it could be based on if you have multiple properties or extended or families or whatever things that you're paying for. It's for some people, it's I need 40 million in the bank in order to generate enough passive income for me to feed this lifestyle that is extensive.
Yeah.
I think it just kind of gets outrageous, and I'm not even judging that. I don't have enough information to even have an opinion at this point. I'm just curious. And so I'm trying to get your opinion because,
I think
maybe you're in a similar position where you're I'm just curious. I don't know.
I think we can maybe for those that want to be here for the long form ride, we can talk a little bit about capitalism and the goodness of capitalism and the pitfalls of capitalism, which is sort of what I think you're pointing to a little bit. I'll try and answer your question directly, and then I think it may be worth talking about capitalism generally.
I think we could even have more discussions on later shows around, because I think I've got some good connections with some individuals who have got a lot of insight in this.
Yeah, I'd be curious.
Yeah.
So my thoughts are as follows. Not always, but probably, if someone has accumulated a lot of resource, that likely means that they've gotten good at generating some form of value in the world. It may not be a value that you and I value. Yeah. The founders of Pornhub or the owners of Pornhub are very rich, and some of the value that they're creating for themselves, or some of the value that they're offering to the world, is pornography that's rooted in violence, you know, that some of which is actual violence, like non-consensual, like really dark fucking shit. And they've made a lot of money. But it is a wanted thing. So if someone has a tremendous amount of resource, then if you sort of take off the moral right and wrong and you look at it from the perspective of like, what's the desire that's being met in the market, then, and we just assume for the sake of conversation that it's neutral or positive, then there's nothing wrong. They've created a lot of value. What's wrong is doing dark shit to create value for yourself.
Yeah.
So
for the sake of having money.
For the sake of having money. So I see nothing wrong with somebody being a billionaire.
No,
if the value that was that if what happened for that to occur was valuable enough that the marketplace says hallelujah, praise Jesus to that, in the
a really good thing for everybody.
That's a great thing for most people.
Yeah.
So money is not a problem, and I think it doesn't really make sense to view money not being utilized in a specific way or put back into the system in a specific way as bad necessarily. It's a personal choice that an individual or group of individuals gets to make. The concern for me should be around, are we generating value in a way that's in the highest good of all? And that, I think, is the fundamental challenge with the system of capitalism. It's really good at efficiently allocating resources, but it's really bad at saying whether or not we should be allocating those resources or offering that thing that is being valued at all. Like, you know, like a lot of people like really dark pornography. Should we be doing that? Probably not. It's probably not good for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Questionable. Yeah. Well, the one thing you did say was that like there's this non-judgment around people. It's like not for us to judge what they're doing with the money after they make it, as long as they're not using it to generate more money through something that's dark.
Yeah, don't be fucking gross and dark. Like,
be a weirdo. Stop being a weirdo.
Like more money is not going to fix your fucking, like, I am not any happier. I'm a little bit more relaxed. It's nice not to have to be forced to work. Like, I have to do shit. Like, if I don't want to right now.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's good.
But I'm not any happier. And I can promise you, I know in my bones that if the money that I had right now came from doing some weird, dark, fucked up shit, I would feel awful if I had violated my morals. And
imagine just walking around feeling like you're living a lie because like you generated some level of robustness through something that's dark.
I mean, to some extent that was true for me a little bit. And it was one of the reasons why I wanted to sell the business, because e-commerce is not dark in and of itself. Speakers are not dark. In fact, you could argue that access to beautiful music heard on a great system is amazing for people's hearts and spirits.
Yeah.
Particularly a human being that's really busy and like the only time they have the experience of sanctuary is like on their ride to and from work in their BMW. You know, imagine a
beautiful mission.
Mid-40s dad who's like, I just want to fucking listen to some Led Zeppelin for 30 minutes.
What if he's jerking off to porn through your speakers?
I don't think our speakers are going to make a meaningful enough difference for to actually. I'm not in support of that as our mission.
Okay.
However, the manufacture of electronics is not great for the planet. There were some speakers that we made that used a metal called neodymium. It's a rare earth metal, and it's some ridiculous amount of mining has to happen to generate like an ounce of ore.
Okay.
So there are these
super expensive.
It's expensive, and there are these insane strip mines throughout, like all over. And when I sat with ayahuasca in 2021, one of the sits that I had, there were 4 ceremonies over the course of a week, just showed me a strip mine.
Wow.
And I was just like, okay, I got to get out.
Yeah.
I got to get out. And so there was some aspect of that I don't love, but I felt like it was balanced by the other things that we were doing to enough of an extent that, like, for example, we were also donating to organizations that help people hear again or hear for the first time.
Cool.
So we were trying to at least be neutral.
Yeah.
Right. At least be a neutral force in the world.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's I don't have a charge around the resource that I have.
Yeah. I find interesting. I work with a lot of other coaches and in their own businesses, and I reflect on my own business processes and things like that. But like, I find oftentimes that like internal opposition like that is what gets in the way of someone creating success for themselves.
Oh my God.
If they know that there's this thing in the background where it's not actually aligned with the depth of their mission, then it's going to be hard to actually generate success.
Yeah. I mean, that was a conversation in the last like 5 years of the business. It was just me and my brother that owned it. And there was a moment where we looked around and we were like, okay, we've been at this for 15 years now. If we were going to grow past our current point, we probably would have done it. Do we want to get better at this? Do we want to pour ourselves into this to an extent that we will have a whole new level of success? And we were like, nah, let's get out.
Makes sense.
And we
You're not like a car stereo guy.
No, I'm not.
You're way cooler than that.
Well, thank you. Not to denigrate anyone that's in the car stereo business.
No.
But yeah, it wasn't my life's purpose.
I've never heard you talk about car stereos until,
Yeah,
you talk about other stuff.
I talk about other things.
Yeah.
I mean, I can certainly go down the audio nerd rabbit hole, which I have become somewhat of, but
Naturally.
It's, like, you're right. There has to be a degree of like passion. And for me, for a long time, the passion was actually around the growth of the business. Like, I loved the game of business.
Yeah.
Rather than the product that we were selling. But at some point, having those two things aligned, I think, is really essential.
Yeah. I feel like that in some ways might be the dangerous piece. Like, I also love the game of business, and I'm growing more and more to appreciate that. But I think that people can get lost in that, and then they get disconnected from shit that's destructive.
Yeah.
Because they're not attached to the thing itself, the service. They're like more attached to the game of business.
Yep.
And I get that. And yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of, I think this is something that would have been nice for us to have touched on earlier, which is there's value creation, which is ultimately what's delivered. But then there's all of the architecture that goes around the actual deliverable that is the business itself. And so the transition from creating value in a way where you personally are doing the thing to a system is a completely new skill.
Yeah.
And it's totally different. Utterly. And it's not for everyone. It could be valuable to bring someone in to support that process, to work with. There's a lot of different possibilities there. But I feel like we're kind of winding down the conversation. It feels pretty complete to me.
Yeah.
Any last things you want to say or anything else you think we should touch on before we go?
No, appreciating you, brother, for sharing your wisdom and your frames. Like, that's how I hear what you have said. Is like, for me, it's been like a lens that I'm looking through, and when I'm looking at business opportunity, and I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome. It's a pleasure to share. And what I'll just say is, if anyone is looking for support on this particular topic and leveling up in this area, Alan does provide one-on-one coaching and also has a group container. And I think he and I would be more than happy to collaborate together to support you as an individual, if that's something that you would like. In case it isn't obvious, I love counterintuitive concepts and ideas, and the conditioning that we've had as a culture around money is so incredibly wrong and backwards, and the truth of it is really hidden from us. And so the like teenage in me, that's like teenage guy, teenage boy in me that's like, fuck the system, like the system's broken, loves being able to support a person in really understanding the game that you're really playing, not the one you think you're playing. So if you would like some support with this, we're here to help. And you can get in touch with Alan at Dr. Allen, ALLEN.co.
Or my Instagram, which is Dr. Allen Bittaker.
Yeah.
Dr. Allen Bittaker on Instagram. And that's also that's probably the best place to reach me, is through Instagram Messenger.
And that's 2 L's, 2 T's, right?
Yeah. ALLENBITTAKER.
Okay. Beautiful. Well, I think that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much for listening. We hope this conversation has been supportive to your understanding of money, and supportive to your relationship to it. Go out there and be somebody. We love you. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this episode valuable, there are 2 easy ways to support the podcast. First, simply subscribe to this podcast or channel on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. And second, please share this episode with a loved one or a friend or someone who would be positively impacted by it. Thank you so much once again, and see you soon.